All right, so where we were last time is we had just run through real basic mathematics of commission calculation. We're going to do that again in chapter 6. We're going to do it kind of upside down. So the easy part of the math is what we went through in chapter 5. You know, the sale price times the commission rate and percentage gives you total commission dollars, and then being able to split that if you're asked to split that between various the broker and the agent, or between two brokerage firms and one of their agents, that sort of thing. Okay, so we'll move on from there. Just very briefly, technology and brokerage. I don't have anything on this in the course, but suffice it to say that, you know, technology, including social media, is becoming more and more relevant and prevalent in the marketing both of agents individually as well as properties. So the more you understand the technology as it's rapidly changing in the world around you, the easier this will be. Does that mean, gee, if I'm not on Facebook, I can't sell real estate? No, it just means that more and more real estate marketing and promotional activities are being done on social media channels. So if that's something you're not good at, talk to your kids, your grandkids, your broker, see if there's a trainer, see if there's anybody to help you. I don't do much of any of this, but you know, for example, the property that I manage, which is, I use that as an example here because social media for renting office space probably wouldn't be very productive, but the building does have a website at least. It lists available space, there's photographs linked to a satellite photograph, that sort of thing. So if people want to see, well, where are each of these tenants? If I were going to take space, where would it be exactly? I can send them an email with a PDF, or I can refer them to the website where hopefully I keep the file reasonably up to date. So just be aware of the fact that there's more and more technology. As I hope you get by now, the MLS multiple listing services are all going to be internet-based anymore. They're all going to be, you know, some kind of computer-based system, and more things are moving toward mobile. People not only want to drive down the road and, you know, get information off a QR code or call an office or whatever on a sign, but some people expect you to be able to just switch on a dime when you're out. You set up a half a dozen properties for them to see, and they ask you for information about something you're not aware of, that you can at least bring it up on your phone or a tablet you have with you and give them the answers right there. So just be aware that that's more and more prevalent, and I presume that's going to continue. Some brokers, particularly on high-end properties where they can afford it, are dropping serious cash and having videos made for the properties, individual properties. And some properties are marketed with a website specific to their address. So somebody, you know, comes to you and you're going to list 1234 Main Street, you might have 1234mainstreet.com if it's not taken. All right, something that matters a lot for both test question purposes as well as practice, if it's going to fall into this accidentally, we're talking about antitrust law. Antitrust law is a misnomer. It's really a bad term left over from 130 years ago. It makes no sense today. The rest of the world calls this anti-competition law. Antitrust law, the term comes from the fact that in the 1800s, when the United States economy was exploding for the first time in recorded human history, major corporations and wealthy individuals who made a lot of money in a big hurry were trying to figure out how to do things like corner markets and take over, you know, large swaths of economic activity so they could generate even higher economic returns for themselves. And they did this in part, or one of the things they did in part to stay away from the government, is they would set up a trust which would own the entity as opposed to themselves. And eventually they could set up a trust which would own a trust, which would own a trust, and make it very difficult to trace ownership. By the time the first antitrust law was passed, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, nobody was using trusts anymore. They're all just using corporations and whatever. But still, the cartoons of the time was, you know, the trust busters and, you know, antitrust, because they were trying to get away from using trusts in that way. There's nothing wrong with using trusts, as we're going to see in a little bit in this course, not tonight, but another evening, we're going to see trusts have a purpose even within real estate. So again, we're talking about anti-competition law. So when you see antitrust law, the idea is the actions that are illegal are in some way probably or possibly limiting competition, which drives up prices for consumers or for the end users. So that's the real issue with antitrust. So price fixing is just when competitors get together and conspire to fix fees. So in a residential or commercial real estate environment, these are people deciding that all sales are going to be set at 6%, for example, in the, in that particular area. That's price fixing, conspiring to fix a fee. So if we understand the business well enough at this point in time, we recognize that you're going to have an employment contract with your employing broker. Your employing broker, that sponsoring broker, can limit the fees that people charge, that the agents in that office charge. That's perfectly acceptable. That's just business dealings within an office. But if any representative of that firm, including sponsored licensees, were to be talking to agents at competing firms about what fees are charged on what kinds of projects, that could become an antitrust violation. So even just sitting at a realtor meeting where you're just kind of curious, gee, I wonder what they charge over there at Jones and Smith Realty, you really can't sit there and talk to them about what they charge and what you charge. Yeah, it's going to sound to the uninitiated or somebody who doesn't know like that's a conversation leading toward, if not participating in, price fixing. So you just stay away from that. You'll find out enough when you compete for listings or for buyer agency arrangements what other people are charging, or you'll just be able to figure it out in general. Group boycotting is another anti-competitive act. Group boycotting is where an industry or members of an industry get together and decide we're not doing business with a particular firm. So for my days in residential real estate, I really enjoyed going to certain real estate closings because some of the title insurance companies where the closings are held would have donuts or candy or all kinds of awesome stuff. It was really great for my waistline. So I began to find that I had a greater affinity for those that served better food. So to give you that an example, let's say that all the agents, the real estate agents in one market decide, hey, let's boycott the no donut title company and let's send all of our business to the really big donut company, title company, because we just want to have a lot of free food. That conversation to direct business like that en masse would violate antitrust laws because ultimately it's going to limit competition, drive up prices for consumers. Allocation of customers or markets can sometimes be tied back into something like price fixing. Instead of really trying to fix the price, though, you're trying to fix who's going to do what business or where you're going to do what business. So this is a case of, let's just say an example here would be you're in a market where it's small enough, there's just a few brokers working, and the two most competitive firms in the market get together for lunch one day and say, hey, why don't you do all the residential business and we'll do all the commercial business. If we get residential, we'll refer it to you, you get commercial, you refer it to us. That would be an allocation of markets. Allocation of customers or markets could also be, hey, you do everything east of the river and we'll do everything west of the river. The same kind of thing, geography split up. Can't do that. Anything that limits competition, that drives up prices, is an antitrust law violation. I don't think you need to worry about whether it's in the Sherman Antitrust Act or the Robinson-Patman Act or which antitrust legislation it is. You could get a test question that says something like, which is the first antitrust law? That's the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. But it's important for you to understand which of these things are legal and not legal. Another thing that they talk about, though I'm not sure how well this is enforced, is tie-in, or sometimes referred to as tying agreements. That is that if you have control of something, you may not really be able to force somebody to use your services to get to something else. The most classic example I can give you of this is not real estate, and that's the decisions against Microsoft, both in the EU and in the United States, about their connecting of Internet Explorer to Windows. How you weren't able to use Firefox or whatever other browsers, or at least you could not buy Internet Explorer with Windows. That's a tying agreement where they dominated, controlled the operating system market, and they were trying to use that to dominate the browser market as well. So that's not allowed. Cases where I'm told, yeah, you can't, for example, own a piece of real estate and then force the buyer of that real estate to also use your construction services. I see that kind of thing happen all the time. I know quite a few very successful real estate development and construction companies that will buy a tract of land, perhaps an industrial development is going to go there, and then when somebody wants to have a warehouse there, they're really forced to go through the developer to have it built. Maybe that's an antitrust violation, but I don't know anybody who sues under that basis. So, whether you see a tie-in agreement question at the state exam or not is up to them, up to random luck. But I think if you focus on price fixing and allocation of markets, those are your two most common things. and then group boycotting after that, you'll be in good shape. And again, for purposes of understanding, your interaction with agents outside of your own office, be careful talking about business on this kind of basis with any other competitor. Don't worry about it inside your office, that you're free to do. But outside of your sponsored office, you just have to limit those kinds of conversations. All right, 3 other statutes that have been added in the last 5 years to what's important in the real estate license law. Do not call registry, Can Spam Act, and the Junk Fax Act. So those 3 things are also at least worthy of a test question apiece, possibly, either in this course or maybe 1 or 2 of those at the state exam. Do not call registry affects us as real estate professionals because you have to have a prior existing business relationship that's within the last year and a half, or some other permission or reason if returning a phone call to call somebody whose number is on the list. And all anybody has to do is go to donotcall.gov or otherwise get their phone number on that list, and you need to be careful who you're calling. So we do get into making cold calls. Bless you. Sometimes we might even get into calling somebody that we think has a help wanted sign in the front yard. So to a real estate agent, particularly somebody who lists houses, for example, a help wanted sign in the front yard to us would say something like, for sale by owner. That should kind of look like that to you. It's somebody who wants to get their house sold. Statistically, we know that somewhere between 80 and 90% of all houses are sold by real estate agents. And so if they really want to get their house sold, and if they want to get the most exposure, it's a legitimate way to look at it to say, you're going to be able to do a better job for them in that regard. They may or may not net more money, which is what they're focused on possibly, because they're going to have to pay you a fee, and maybe another agent a fee if they use your services. But you can get them more action, more activity, and maybe get them more money. So then the question is, can I call somebody who's got a sign that says for sale by owner and it's got their phone number on it in order to list their house for sale? Well, the answer is, it depends. Are they on the do not call list? Because if they're on the do not call list, that sign is not enough to allow you to call them, not for the purpose of listing their property for sale. Now, what if you have a buyer? What if you're not angling for the listing at all? You don't even like working with listings for the purpose of our example here. You have a buyer who's interested in that kind of house in that neighborhood. Can you call that number on there and ask if they're on the do not call list, and ask if you can show their property? There, I think the answer is yes, you can, because you're giving them exactly what they want, that access to that buyer. The first statement out of your mouth when you call them is, I'm a real estate broker, and I have a buyer, and I'm wondering, would you pay a buyer agency fee if they're interested? Second, would you be willing to let me show the property? Third, would be one of those no agency or ministerial acts things. Remember, I'm not representing you, and you get them to sign off on that when you go to show the property. But if you follow those kinds of rules, you'll be okay. So again, in your office policy and procedures manual, there should be an explanation of how this is going to work. Talk to your broker. I don't toil under this at all because I don't make any cold calls. I really don't do this kind of thing. I respond to tenant inquiries and to consumers who contact me directly, but I don't go out of my way to prospect. So I still don't have to function under this. But if you're going to do any active or proactive prospecting, even if it's from past clients, you need to recognize that once those clients are past client enough, they're in the same situation that you can't call them unless you have otherwise gotten their permission or have some other arrangement with them where they contact you or something to that effect. All right, so that's the basic idea of the do not call registry. Make sure you stay up on that and understand that fully when you're in business if you're going to use the phone to do cold calling. Can Spam Act. This is all about email or texts and other similar kinds of contacts. So it's kind of a strange name to me. Join the assault of non-solicited pornography and marketing, as if pornography and marketing should be in the same line in every sentence. But the idea is, we get hit with a lot of stuff we didn't ask for, or we're wondering, how did this come about? So if you're going to send out email blasts, and this is a great and efficient and inexpensive way to reach large numbers of consumers, you need to make sure that they have the right to do things like opt out, unsubscribe. You get these emails still occasionally where you look, hey, where's the unsubscribe link, and it's not there. Well, that's going to violate the Canned Spam Act. So again, this is federal regulation, and so it's the kind of thing that you need to make sure you're complying with. So if you're going to make most of your marketing by phone calls, pay most attention to the Do Not Call Act. If you're going to be doing most of your marketing by email, I would tend to do more of this sort of thing. Then you need to make sure everything conforms with Canned Spam. And if you are looking at identification things, you also have what the Illinois License Act defines. You've got to define and make sure that it's clear that your communication is from you as a licensee. So all of your sponsored brokers' contact information has to be in there as well. Their name as it's registered with the state, anything they require you to have in terms of a phone number, that sort of thing must also be in those emails. So that's for license law reasons. All right, so that's Canned Spam Act. And then the Junk Fax Prevention Act, same thing. If you're going to send out solicitations, property management, I used to get these. More commonly, I would get unsolicited faxes, not from a roofing contractor or a kitchen remodeler, but from a travel agency. And so if you're going to, funny thing about this statute, kind of annoying to me, but so there has to be on the fax a number to which you can contact them to say, please remove me. So what do they give you? Their fax number. Can you ever get through to them by fax? No, because they're constantly sending out more junk faxes. Nonetheless, it's there, it meets the requirements, and if you wait till 3 a.m., it'll go through eventually. So this one is the least likely today. I would say faxes are out of favor, much more likely that canned spam is a big deal, and again, that do not call. So no, just enough about those that you can identify them and understand the basics of them for test question purposes, and then be prepared to work around them as a professional. Real estate offices 10 years ago weren't quite up to what the heck we were going to do with these things, but today everybody's had plenty of time to catch up, and I think the FCC or the FTC or the Department of Justice would be all over your office and realtors in general if we weren't able to follow those rules at this point in time. Questions about anything at all left over then from Chapter 5? Goody. So let's move on to Chapter 6. Uh-oh, blank screen. That means I got more cool, awesome graphics coming. So we've gone through this. If this will work, So we've gone through this diagram before, where the seller engages the services of a broker. We're going to call that broker the listing agent. The property is then put into the MLS if we're talking residential. We then make, through the MLS, we make that property available through the process of cooperation, right? This is where the listing broker offers to share the listing, and if there's also cooperative commission, which there would be in a residential setting typically, to compensate the buyer's agent, if that's the agreement with the seller. That makes the listings available to the selling agents or the brokers who are driving around with buyers in their cars. Now, tonight, as we go through Chapter 6, we're able to see, yeah, that first agreement where you're representing the seller, that's the listing agreement, and the buyer agency agreement. So you've read about these, right? So that's the basic thing. Now, also, I think somewhere in here, the book talks about the idea that through a multiple listing service, sub-agency is prohibited. This is moved around in the text from various places, and I don't know that sub-agency is practiced much in Illinois at all. So quick history lesson. So you've read this, to give you an idea what sub-agency is, was, and why it's now prohibited. And yes, you might still see a test question on this at the state exam. So prior to the License Act in 2000, in fact, actually prior to sometime in the 1990s when there was a partial rewrite of the act, sub-agency used to be the norm. And under sub-agency, the information flow here could still work the same, but basically a seller would hire a listing broker who would put the property in the MLS, who it would invite other brokers to be sub-agents. And when you're a sub-agent, you're an agent of the agent. That's what sub means, right? So when I bought my first house in 1980, I was, well, in 1980, I was 6. So I was going around with this, my wife and I were going around with this woman who was, I thought of as our agent, and she showed us this house, and we bought it, and it turns out it had all kinds of problems in it. You remember the Residential Real Property Disclosure Act in Illinois didn't come out until 1994, and in 1980, I look back some years later after I got licensed to get in the business, and I thought, oh, she was never our agent. She never worked for us. She was finding us properties, but she had no duties to us at all. Who did she work for? Even though she was sitting in this seat, who did she work for? She worked for the seller. She was a sub-agent. So that's why there was no need to disclose anything or tell us anything. Her job was to sell the house for the seller. So this was common practice. This was the old common law way in which things were done. This is another one of those examples where the state says, we don't want to do it that way anymore. And how do we change a common law? We pass a statute. We get it out of the case law and common law area and pass a statute. So now the act says sub-agency is still legal. We're not trying to ban it overall, but to protect consumers, we want very clear that the norm in Illinois now is that these brokers down here are free to represent buyers. And that's typically what they'll be doing. The fact is they were always free to represent the buyers, but they just never bothered because the money was coming from the seller. So this is also why we have emphasized before this in the text that compensation has nothing to do with creating agency, because the common practice was the seller paid the fee in cash at the closing to the listing broker, who in turn paid the buyer's agents, even if they weren't really the buyer's agents, right? Even if they were sub-agents. So by putting this line in the act that says sub-agency cannot be allowed through an MLS, we remove that possibility on most residential transactions where it's understood that typically the selling agent is not going to be a sub-agent of the seller, but rather is going to be the buyer's representative. That's one of the reasons why you're seeing that. And then also clarifying that it doesn't matter who pays who in this picture. Compensation doesn't create an agency relationship, so the money is irrelevant in terms of agency creation. So again, if you're wondering in some cases why are these things the way they are, it's because we're trying to correct some bad practice that had evolved. So today you'll find some agents that all they do are they're just buyer's reps. That's all they do. Much easier to do that today than it was to do it prior to 1995 or whenever. Now also keep in mind, and I'm going to ask questions a little bit later, and we've had a little bit of touching on this in the course already, but this concept of how things were done in the past and how we're doing them now, and is that how we should be doing them, is going to come up a little bit later in the our lecture. So you might want to just sort of remember this for that time. More cool graphics. Oh no, just slowing it down. All right, so here we go. So the first kind of agency agreements that we're going to talk about here are listing agreements. So there are 3 of each type of agency agreement that we're going to talk about, and they're more similar to one another than you might recognize. So the listing agreement that you always want to operate under, and that we typically do operate under, is this exclusive right to sell. This is the norm. An exclusive right to sell agreement basically says to the seller, I get paid a commission as your listing broker no matter what the procuring cause is. No matter what triggers the sale, I get paid. If there's a sale and your deal closes, you owe us the commission as specified in our agency agreement. Complete protection for the brokers, very little, if any, flexibility for the sellers. That's how we operate. Let me explain why this is important. It's very difficult to know sometimes what triggers a sale. You know what you know, but you don't see everything in the picture all the time. So this is based upon a very believable sort of scenario based on experiences that I've had and seen others have. Let's imagine that you go to a listing appointment fairly early in the morning, and you go to this guy's house, and he tells you that he's finally decided to list the house, even though his neighbor has been telling him for 6 months, hey, when you're ready to sell, let me know and I'll buy the place from you. You give him the market analysis, and he's happy with what you think the price is going to be on the property. You go through your whole dog and pony show with him, and he decides to list with you right there on the spot. So you take care of all the paperwork, you invest several hours of your time, You've got everything signed, countersigned before you leave. You put a electronic key box on the front door. You put your sign with all your riders on it in the front yard. And once you put that sign in the yard, you're done. You throw your briefcase, etc., in the car, and you head off to your next appointment. You'll get the thing in the MLS maybe the next day when you have time. Right now, you're just, you've got another appointment to go to. By rule, by the way, you get 72 hours around here to get stuff in or out of the MLS when things change. So assuming that, you're now off to your next appointment, what do you suppose is going to happen now that there's a sign in the front yard? The neighbor's going to come over because the neighbor's been saying for 6 months, hey, I'll buy your place. And even though the guy's been telling them, hey, I'm ready, the neighbor hasn't done anything. But now there's a sign in the front yard. So he knows this guy is serious. So rather than have the house sell to somebody else, finally the neighbor, digs out his passbook savings account, his checkbook, and goes over to him and says, hey, I got the money. I can buy the place, I'm ready. So you finish with your next appointment and you see you've got a voice message from the guy who you just listed his house. And he says, you know what, I've changed my mind. I've decided, I'm not going to list the property. You didn't put it into the MLS, you didn't do any marketing, you didn't do whatever. You feel really rotten, right? Kind of forcing him to stick with the contract. You haven't even told the broker about this yet. So you go back and you pull the sign, take the lockbox, shake hands, and you walk away. Now the property is going to close in 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks. What triggered the sale? The sign in the front yard. But you would have no way of knowing that fast, that early. Now this is a bit of a stretch, but it can happen. Sometimes you don't know what triggers the sale, what really leads to the sale of that property, what advertising, what contact, what information, what activity, whatever it is. So if you're going to put forth time, effort, and energy to sell something for somebody, what do you want to know? That you're going to get paid. And back to the story I was telling the other night, it never quite finished. Remember I talking about the young couple who bought the house over the weekend? Don't call us, we'll call you, and they bought the house through another agent. It really never finished making the key points there. The reason that kind of thing happens, and it does happen, is when the agent, the buyer's agent that this young couple or anybody else like them is working with, never bothers to explain, oh, by the way, I only get paid if you buy something and do so through me. If you never explain to your clients, and I think for those of you in particular who've never been through this before, think what you thought a week ago. Did you understand that this is completely commission-based and you're only going to get paid if you sell a place? If you weren't quite sure about that, then you can bet that your clients may not know. So it's your job to make sure they understand, if you want them to stick with you, that, hey, I only get paid if you close, and you close through me. So that's the idea. You don't really want the exclusive right to sell the property. What you really want is the exclusive right to get paid. That's what this really is, the exclusive right to be paid when the property sells, no matter what the procuring cause is. All right, everybody clear on that? That's the most common agreement, always in writing, has to be exclusive. That's what the industry typically works with. One step down from that, kind of a hierarchy, looking at this where now we're going to give the seller some flexibility and take away some of our protection, is an exclusive agency listing. Now what does the seller have the right to do? Sell it themselves, right. And this is not really, really common, but it's common enough. It's common enough that in particular there's a significant industry segment who always wants to have the right to do this. So think of a group of sellers that you could identify in one word or a hyphenated word that would always want to have an exclusive agency listing. And oh, by the way, they sell lots of homes, these people I'm thinking of. Think of Mr. Williams. Who? Home builders. Home builders know that real estate professionals may sell their house. But particularly big home builders, what else do they have? They have a sales office, and they have redirectional signs, and they have marketing staffs and budgets. For large residential real estate developments, on average, my interviewing builders in the city and in the suburbs, around here, about half of all of new construction are sold by real estate agents. The other half are sold by the builders themselves. Or at least that's how they track it. really think about it, if you're a builder, why would you want to pay an agent to have an exclusive right to sell when you're doing half the work? You wouldn't. Plus, if you have to bump up the price of every house by 2.5 or 3%, now you may be at a competitive disadvantage with all your builder competitors, right? You want to have a better product for less money, not a better product for the same price, or the same product for a higher price. You're looking for an advantage. So exclusive agency listing is not limited to home builders, but it's ideal for home builders. This agreement is not that commonly known, even though here it is, you know, right in the middle of your textbook. I've worked with a number of brokers who don't have a blank exclusive agency listing agreement in their office. And they somehow try and modify an exclusive right to sell and just put a note at the bottom that seller has the right to sell the property on their own. This is a separate idea here, right? Exclusive agency listing. And if you're going to do a lot of work listing houses for home builders, you should have a standard exclusive agency listing agreement that you can just type in the details and run by somebody who's a builder. Shouldn't be that complicated to have one. Now again, it's not limited to home builders. Anybody is entitled, anybody you want to give this to. So you have a friend you're selling for, and you know they say, well, I'd like to try it on my own. You can say to them, well, you know, why don't you let me list it? I'm trying to get started in the business. You can also, we'll do an exclusive agency and you can have the right to sell it yourself. You could do that if you wanted to offer that to somebody, assuming your broker permits you to do so. What's the risk of doing that? Yeah, not getting paid. You do the work, you put in the 3 or 4 hours to get all the data together, to photograph it, to do everything to get it into the MLS. You enter all the data, and you maybe even show the property a number of times, and then when the property's really heating up and you think you're really close, the owner calls you and says, hey, great news, I signed a contract last night. And you get nothing. Is that illegal? No, perfectly legal, because you've all agreed to it, everybody knew it in advance. It's a business decision. Remember, this isn't a job. For most of you, this is a business opportunity. And when you're a businessman or a businesswoman, you have to decide, how am I spending my time? Am I doing it effectively? So you have to ask yourself a question. Do I want to take an exclusive agency listing if I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours of my time with reduced chances of getting paid? There's no guarantee you get paid under an exclusive right to sell. Not every listing sells, or not every listing sells within that time frame. Or the client may just decide, you know what, I don't want you to market my property anymore, and take it off the market, or take it off away from your office and market it with somebody else. My best friend just got licensed. Whatever. There are those kinds of possibilities. So there's no guarantee here. That's the greatest chance you have. So a significantly less opportunity for you once you give the owner the right to sell the property themselves. Just a business decision for you to make. Again, you should expect, in my opinion, home builders to want exclusive agency listings. They want to have the right to sell it themselves. Now we're talking about an open listing. So we've gone from as much protection for the broker as possible with no flexibility for the seller, to a little less protection for the broker and some flexibility for the seller, to no real protection for the broker and complete flexibility for the seller. So an open listing, notice the word exclusive is missing. So that means multiple brokers can have open listings. Open listings are so open they can be oral, technically, and be legal. I don't know how you would ever prove you were entitled to a fee. But really, an open listing is probably good as it serves as two tools. One, it can serve as a commission agreement. So if you do trigger the sale, if you do bring the buyer and take care of all that, you're the procuring cause, it would specify what you're entitled to get paid. It also gives you the right to promote somebody's property. In Illinois, it is illegal to offer somebody's property for sale if you don't have an agreement to do so. Right? You can't just go down the street and go, ooh, I heard the Smiths are thinking of selling. I'm going to throw a sign in their front yard. Well, I'll put it in the parkway where it's public property. You can't do that. You can't take a picture of their house and throw it in the newspaper before somebody gets a listing on it, right? You need their permission. So you could, under an open listing, market that property for sale. Create a flyer, put it in the MLS, if that's allowable. By rule around here it's not, but that's not a law issue. In other places you might be able to. So, I mean, there is that option. But as the text hopefully has pointed out to you by now, there's all kinds of wonderful questions about, Joe has a listing on the property, Sally sells the property and gets paid. What kind of listing did Joe have? An open listing. So no protection whatsoever. So why would anybody ever do an open listing? Again, for residential by rule, not by law, not a part of this class really, by rule around here, the local multiple listing service, and its 45,000 member licensees, whatever, will not allow you to put an open listing into the MLS. Only exclusive. So what's the point of having a listing, open listing, and when and why might you do it?
It's got high competition.
Possibly. High visibility is probably a better thing, you know, in terms of where it's at.
Highest bidder, like the property is just unobtainable to most people.
Could be. I think the answer for most of you will be you never will. I think the odds of you working under an open listing are very thin. I did one, and I'll tell you how it went. It's the best reason I can give you, for why you might do it. So I was already promoting for sale 2 6-acre parcels in Aurora. Both were zoned similarly. One was out by Fox Valley, and one was closer in toward downtown. So I got a call one day off of one of the signs, I guess, or maybe the exposure that it was getting on LoopNet or some other site, I don't remember. And at first I thought I had a prospective buyer, somebody who was expressing interest in one of these two. Pretty soon I realized, oh no, this is somebody else who's a seller of a piece of property, and they're fishing for information. So I talked to him for a while and realized he had just come off of what he considered to be a bad relationship with a broker. I doubt that now, but at the time that was the view he had, so it was the one that I adopted. So I offered to list his property for him. Of course, what's the point of having incoming phone calls? You can't turn them into business. So he said no, he really wasn't interested on this kind of a basis. So I offered him exclusive agency. So what about, I'll market the property for you for sale, but you still have the right to sell it. He said, no, I don't really want anything like that. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I could possibly help you. I literally at that point in time was just planning a campaign to send flyers out around the country to brokers and investors who were involved in mini storage warehouse development, because that's what a common thing these other two properties had in common. And I knew that the property he had could also fit into that category. All the same size, all in a similar price range, all now addressed in Aurora. And so he went for this. Now the property's on Route 31, right at the edge of Aurora and Montgomery on the east side. I don't know what it is now. I think it has since sold. I didn't end up selling it. But I got exposure on Route 31 with a big 4-foot by 4-foot sign. I had the opportunity to just throw one more flyer in the envelopes I was already mailing out, and I actually generated an offer from a broker of all people. So really, it had gone to a storage warehouse developer in Texas, the mailing, and they called their broker. They had a broker who was their exclusive site rep all around the country, and that broker called me. Never asked me if I had an open listing. Never asked, didn't care anything about the fact that he could contact the owner directly and get the entire fee. So that's a little fallacious in terms of what the text leads you to believe. So they made us a written offer, which was higher than the guy's appraised value, but lower than what he was trying to get for the property. That was the real problem, was that he was overpriced for the time. He was probably right eventually. The beautiful thing about selling vacant land, eventually you'll be right. No matter how high your price is, it might take you 50 years, but eventually you'll be right. So it didn't seem to me like it was a lot of effort, and I would get some opportunity. And of course, when I had the opportunity, I constantly reminded him that maybe we should switch to a more exclusive type of listing agreement. He never really wanted to do that. So again, ultimately, he wasn't willing to take anything much below his asking price, and even the offer I generated, which was about, I think, 5% above his recent appraised value, still wasn't enough for me. So I wasn't going to be able to sell that for those reasons. But other than that, I can't imagine why I would ever take an open listing. Again, you have this delicate balance of all these fiduciary duties we've been telling you about, all of the stuff that you owe to your clients, and all this fair and honest dealing and treating people well and putting others ahead of yourself, etc. Just in terms of how you should generally think as a servant here, which is really what you're becoming. And then we throw this at you, and it's one chance I have to remind you that you have to eat. And your broker needs to earn enough money to pay the light bill, right, and to advertise and such. So nobody in the picture is going to look out for your interests any better than you are, including your sponsoring broker. please do not confuse your sponsoring broker with, you know, maybe your doting grandparent or somebody who's gonna make sure that everything in life goes your way. They're in the business to generate revenue for themselves, and you are a necessary tool for that to happen, because that individual who launched the brokerage is only one person, and they need dozens or hundreds of people to make as much money as they are hoping to make. They are not gonna warn you about going out and getting listings that may or may not take up too much of your time. They just want as much potential business as possible. You have to manage your business to say, I wanna treat people well, so I have to be careful not to overspend my time on things that are never gonna generate revenue for me or my broker. Again, you have to be your own lookout in that regard. Quick review: exclusive right to sell listing, complete protection for the broker, no flexibility for the seller, exclusive agency listing, a little less protection for us as brokers, a little bit of flexibility for the seller, open listing, basically a commission agreement or a right to market the property agreement, no protection for you whatsoever, and complete flexibility for the seller as well. Kelvin?
Would you want to put open listings under like investment, for investment people?
Not necessarily. I don't think you want to seek them out at all. Again, the only reason it made any sense to me whatsoever is because I was already going after the same people on that property, and I couldn't include a note with those mailings without that seller's permission. The easiest way to get that seller's permission was to just sign up an open listing. That also gave me the right to put a sign in the yard on Route 31, which I got a lot of calls off of. So for those two reasons, I took it. But otherwise, I can't imagine why I would ever take an open listing at all.
So for open listings, they can have multiple signs on the front?
Yes, if the seller agrees to that, and you may see that from time to time. You drive by a piece of property and there'll be two different broker signs on it. Bless you. That would be an indication, perhaps, that those are both open listings.
So for exclusive agency, can I have a by owner? For sale by owner?
Yes, yes. If you allow the owner the right to sell the property themselves, you could have your sign and the owner's phone number up there in the front yard at the same time. That would be up to you in part as to what you would allow. You know, you can restrict them from doing that under this agreement if they are willing to agree to that, but they're probably not, right? So if you talk about home builders, for example, that's the whole idea. They got signs all over the subdivision, and on Friday night, when the city of Aurora's zoning compliance people go home for the weekend, all the redirectional signs come out, and they stay there until, you know, Monday morning when the zoning people come back out, and the advertising money and all that kind of stuff, right? So it only makes sense for a seller if they're going to proactively try and sell it. Because if a seller just says, well, you know, my brother-in-law was thinking about buying the property, you can create an exemption. Do an exclusive right to sell and get the brother-in-law's name and say, well, okay, except if it's bought by so-and-so. Or, you know, I did one of these many years ago with friends and people who were clients of mine, I think on 4 or 5 occasions, where I did an exclusive right to sell on their house that they had done for sale by owner before then. They had 8 families, 8 people who had come through to see it, and I gave them exemptions for those. Interestingly enough, one of them bought it. I'm not sure how interesting it was at the time, but other questions about these listing agreements? Then the type of test questions you get here that are really commonplace are a scenario, a description, and you have to figure out, ooh, which type of listing agreement was it? If you understand the basics, you know, there was an exclusive, the broker had an exclusive, but the owner had the right to sell, that's going to put you in the middle camp, right? No matter what triggers the sale, the broker gets paid, it's at the top. If the broker has a listing but doesn't get paid because somebody else sold it, then it's got to be down here at the bottom. Yes?
Can your sponsoring broker tell you what kind of like?
Yeah, your sponsoring broker could say we don't do open listings. Yes, they would have the right to do that. I seriously doubt they would care if it was exclusive right to sell or exclusive agency, though they wouldn't want somebody running around using exclusive agency at will. They would want to know why you're choosing that in a particular instant. And like I say, with home builders, I wouldn't even offer them exclusive right to sell, no matter how small they were. I would automatically assume that builder has their own stable of customers. It's not at all uncommon that if Jeff builds you a house and you like what he's built, 8 years later when you're looking to build something bigger, or you wanna do a custom addition, or you wanna downsize, you go right back to your favorite builder and say, well, here's what we're looking for, where have you got lots and that kind of thing. So builders are gonna wanna always have the right to sell on their own, I would think.
But then you would still be there at the closing and stuff?
Yeah, sure, exactly. Well, if you trigger the sale, yes, but if the builder sells it themselves, no, you wouldn't be involved in it at all.
Okay.
So you gotta have to imagine a big subdivision where there's gonna be hundreds upon hundreds of homes built. You're gonna end up being at closings for half of them, not for the ones you didn't sell, but just for the ones you did. In fact, even there, you might not even have to do that. Builders sometimes don't need the same level of services. You might not even charge them as much money because of the volume and because of how that works. Again, if you're talking about listing something for a KB Homes or somebody like that who's got lots of transactions. So it kind of depends upon your circumstances. You have to look at what you're doing. Yeah, you're only going to provide the services for people who are hiring you to do so and to pay you.
Okay.
So below this in the text, or after this in the text, they have these provisions. I've spelled this out to be this way because I want to make sure you understand that a net listing is not in the same camp as these other listing agreements that we've talked about. A net listing has to do with what the basis of compensation is. So the test question that's going to revolve around net listing is something to the effect of, the sellers say to their listing agent, we just need to get $200,000 out of the sale. Everything above that you can keep as your commission. That's what a net listing sounds like. Or it could be, are net listings legal or illegal in Illinois? So it's important to understand that net listings in Illinois are legal. However, if you were coming to work for my brokerage, if I had such a thing, I wouldn't allow them. Net listings are a really bad idea for several reasons. One, if you do sit down with a seller, your job is to get them as much money out of this deal as possible. So if a seller in a very glib and cavalier manner says, well, we just need to get 200 grand out of the sale. That's what we need to net. After that, you can have all the money you want. And you say to them, well, I really think your house is going to sell for closer to 250. I would think for a while you would have to spend some time at that listing appointment convincing them they really should be listing the house at 250, not at 205 or something. So that's the first thing. It's problematic because it kind of puts you at odds with your own client. Now you're going to potentially make more money out of the deal than they are. If that does happen, you think they're not going to file a consumer complaint eventually when they wake up or they go to the closing and they go, holy crap, they really did get $45,000 in commission on this house. It should have been 12. How did that happen? So, that's a problem. The other thing, and maybe this is even worse, so let's say you've got this net listing and you listed it and put it in the MLS at $250,000, and it's an exclusive right to sell with a net listing provision for how you're going to get compensated. And so you put into the MLS that you're offering a 3% cooperative commission, and the seller gets an offer of $200,000, and you trudge over to the sellers, saying to them, sorry, we've got this low offer, but I'm here to present it to you, so I got to do it. And the seller goes, fine, we'll take it. Now, right, there's no money for a commission because what they said is everything over 200 grand is yours, and there isn't anything over 200 grand. Plus what have you said in the MLS? You're going to pay 3% of that sale number to the buyer's agent. So now not only are you collecting 0, but you owe 6. Net listings are not a good idea. So again, that's the other way to look at it. They are legal, but they're just not wise. An option listing is simply a listing agreement where you, as the designated agent or your broker, have the right to purchase the property. Not an obligation, but just an option, the choice within the listing agreement. These are problematic because now it puts your agency duties at odds, right? Now you're a principal to the transaction because now in theory you or the broker are the buyer or the potential buyer if you trigger that option. And also I think such that you probably have to overpay. For example, and this does happen from time to time where you're an agent and you walk into a house and you go, oh, this is awesome, this is exactly what we're looking for. Or this would be make for an awesome rental property or whatever. Keep in mind that we don't tend to list properties for sale at what we think they're going to sell for, but a little bit higher to allow for negotiating room. So if you do a market analysis and it says the property is going to sell for 200, you would list for between 205 and 210. Now, if you list a place, let's say for 205, even though your market analysis said 200 and you are really going to want to buy it, how do you say to the state sometime later that, yeah, I was doing what was in my client's best interest by paying them less than the asking price? Kind of hard to prove that. So again, I think those are a little bit problematic, but it is a possibility. It's something that you could do. You see test questions on that? I don't really know.
Isn't the seller ultimately responsible for what they accept though?
They are, except that once you're their agent, you owe them a higher level of duty than you would if you were just a buyer. And then the multiple listing provision gets back to the MLS or the use of the MLS. It advises the seller, if you're putting property into an MLS, that other brokers, agents from other firms are going to come through their property. And this is them giving you permission to do that, because you need that. That's the tool that's going to make the house sell probably. And it's also an opportunity, if you walk through this agreement with them, to point out, and don't forget, since most of the agents coming through your house aren't from our office, put away your jewelry and things that we talked about, the last class time. Put away, cover up your wall safe, put your valuables in a lockbox at the bank or whatever. It's also the reason why brokers get hired. Most sellers of real estate understand that the most powerful tool you have as a residential practitioner is the MLS, period. Statistics have shown roughly, it depends upon what study you look at, somewhere between 65 and 85% of all houses that are priced right and put in the MLS sell for those reasons and those reasons alone. Not because your picture on your sign is so awesome, not because it was listed with you, not because you put the right color throw rug in the front entry to stage the house perfectly. Mostly it's about getting the price attractive and getting it in front of the largest audience. That's what triggers most sales. So, anybody who doesn't have access to the MLS is not a very attractive listing brokerage firm for a seller of residential property.
Now, investors that don't need a real estate broker's license, are they known to buddy up with brokers so they can say, hey, look on the MLS what you got?
Yes, it's very common. When you're talking about working with investors as a buyer's agent, it's very common to do repeat deals with them. If you can find an investor who makes multiple purchases. I think, for me, I've never done that on a huge scale, but I've had a couple of clients over the years with whom I did, probably three that, more I think about it, more that are popping into my head, that did 3 or 4 deals with me over a period of a few years. Buyers or sellers, depending upon the situation. And that's kind of nice to get that kind of repeat business. No business ever sees anything better than repeat or referral business. That's true for your agency business. That's true for really for any activity. So yeah, if you've got investors, they may come back to you over and over and over again. And for those of you who are here who've got family that are going to be working in that space, that's ideal. All right, see what else we got here. Oh, here's a graphic again. This was from the example where you listed Mom's house. Just to restate this, right? We know that we've got no agency relationship really between you as the designated agent and Mom, the client. This can also work on the buyer agency side. We've got the general agency agreement there between the designated agent, the sponsored licensee, if you will, and the sponsoring broker. And now we can more clearly see that what we've got here on the outside is this brokerage agreement, right? So that's really what we're talking about, whether this is a scenario with a buyer's agent, and a buyer, or whether it's a listing, it's the same thing. It's going to work the same basic way. So again, this is in those slides, just shown, same idea, just shown in a slightly different scenario. Do you want?
So in order for a listing broker or agent to be a buyer, they need to have a designated agent?
Well, so if you're the listing brokerage, like the sponsoring brokerage firm, and if you want to avoid dual agency, right, you would have 2 different designated agents, one repping the buyer and one repping the seller. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but here's a scenario
Okay.
that just happened. I have a listing agent that lists a property,
Okay.
and it's at $53,000. And she contacted another broker, like a buyer, and someone that I knew offered then she was waiting to see what's going on. Then she called back, and the listing agent said, "Oh, I sold the house at 53." I go, "How could you do that? I mean, the offer was 59, and you sold to 53."
Yeah, that I don't really know how or what that is without understanding all the details. I mean, you know, it could be that they had a cash offer, it could be it was already sold and the sellers decided not to take that new offer when it came in. It certainly does raise some red flags, right? If I offered more money, why wouldn't they take my offer? I don't know the answer to that. But that doesn't necessarily really have anything to do with this here. I will say that when it comes to dual agency, one of the problem areas for me, if I'm representing a buyer on a house and I make an offer, I ask the listing broker, do you have any other offers? Because I want to know what else is happening. Have any other offers been submitted? I'll ask that question before we even write ours. Once I know the buyer is committed to write an offer, I'll ask the listing agent, do you have any other offers? And then I'll let them know, we may be writing an offer. Don't tell them it's definite, and we may be writing an offer. So they'll know we're kind of in the queue possibly. At that point in time, if they say, I've already got offers in place or whatever, I'll present that to my buyer and they can decide if they want to proceed or not. Some people will say, I don't want to get into a bidding war. Others will say, okay, let's make a better offer than a stronger offer, depending upon their scenario, what they have pictured in their mind. One case for me was the listing agent said, I just got another offer and I'm presenting it tonight. I said, thank you for telling me that. Now what I want to know is it through you? And his answer was yes. I said, all right, well, we're writing an offer, but here's the deal. I want to come and present our offer. Now, by rule in the MLS, so this is an MLS membership thing, not a law thing, unless the seller has put in writing that they don't need to see your offer, that they don't want you to present your offer to them, they only want them to come through their listing agent, a listing agent does not have the right in our local MLS to prohibit you from presenting to the seller. They have to facilitate that. So I said, not only do I want to present it, but I want to present second. You present your offer to your lister first, and then we'll come in and present ours. Because I felt like as long as his had already been presented to the seller, that we'd have the opportunity to present, and I would be able to read that, and I'd get a much better sense with the seller of where they were, and the seller wouldn't necessarily be beholden to their agent, but to the better of the deal. Now, I don't know whether it made a difference in the long run, but our clients bought that house, not the client represented under dual agency by the listing agent. So I don't know if that kind of thing would have mattered. You get into all kinds of strange situations today with lenders or other investors as owners who maybe don't know a whole lot about, really what's happening in the local market. But either way, this designated agency serves basically as a purpose to allow the sponsoring brokers to avoid as much dual agency as possible. Otherwise, it really doesn't have a purpose. It's just that's what it does.
That's the reason why my question was, can a listing agent become a buyer also?
Yeah, it would have to be with signed permission, dual agency permission from both parties. And then to do that and not present a higher offer would violate the license law. To not present a higher offer in a timely manner would even presenting a lower offer or not presenting a lower offer violates the License Act. And here's one thing that happened to me, and this is not something I'm particularly proud of, but it taught me a lesson very early on. This was on one of the very first houses I ever listed. So we got an offer in, and it was a fair amount, and the seller was somebody I knew pretty well, and they were in kind of a hurry, and so I presented that to them right away, and they went to contract that night. First thing the next morning, I got a call from another agent who said, hey, we're going to be writing an offer on the property. And I said to them, oh, well, we went to contract last night. And I realized at that moment in time, before I allowed my seller to negotiate that deal where they got the one offer, I should have called every broker who'd shown that property within the previous couple of days and said, hey, we have an offer, are you people thinking about it? Because if I had gotten any feedback at that point in time, yeah, we're thinking about it, we'll let you know tomorrow morning, I might have encouraged my seller to slow that process down on that first offer, but I failed to sort of reach out. Now, the license law doesn't require you to do that, but I still felt like I'd let my seller down, So is it possible that the listing agent, you know, steered the deal to a friend or sent it to their own client for their own commission? It's distinctly possible. And either way, it would be completely illegal unless the seller was complicit and said, yeah, we don't care about, you know, this offer, we'll take the lower one for whatever reason. Because once the seller, you know, decides, then the agents are largely off the hook in that regard. Okay, so talking about listing property here. So where are your listings going to come from? Well, they'll be your clients once you list them, but where are they going to come from? They're going to come from random consumers, but hopefully you've got some better way to draw those folks in. You know, your billboard advertising, internet presence, your marketing, showing up, being a member of the PTA, saying to every person and their dog that you meet that, hey, you know, I'm a real estate agent, you need services, etc. Also, some of these things are just going to come from, as we talked about, floor time, you manning the incoming phone calls, internet leads you generate maybe from your own website or whatever, you know, or that come into the office that are referred to you. So a lot of these people you will never have met before. So this idea of, you know, sort of what you're going to do to cement this opportunity, this lead, is important. A lot of success in this business is about converting leads. It's helpful if you have contacts. It's helpful if you have friends and family. And having had people in the past who said, you know, I really want you to represent us, and no, it's okay if you can't show me a house for the next 5 days, is huge to me, at least particularly today. I have one couple that I'm working with today, they give me a week. Here's what we'd like to see, and here's our schedule for the next week, anytime in there is okay. Because they know that I'm doing this. And they constantly invite me to show them property, what I'm here teaching you, and that's okay, because their job is to give me that time frame. But, you know, that's important that they understand and that they know that. If I'm out otherwise, it may not be that I can't because I'm teaching, but because, you know, I've already got showings that night or whatever. So people you don't know, you've never met before, this is your only chance to make a solid first impression. How you represent yourself, how you come across, it has a lot to do with whether they're going to like you, hire you or not. Part of that is pricing the property. CMA, or market analysis, and we'll look at this in a little bit of detail when we cover appraisal in chapter 19. That's your professional opinion of market value. Your view, your prediction of the future of what their home or office building or whatever is going to sell for. So you'll do this market analysis. In order to do that, you have to do a bit of a study to see what has recently sold, particularly in that subdivision, or particularly of that same size and shape. Basically what we do is we try and find the twin to the home you're listing. Rarely exists. Maybe really technically, legally never exists, but you're trying to find the twin to that house that sold within the last 6 months and using that sale to predict what's going to happen on this property. The better you are at that, the better you'll be at being an agent. And there's no way to screen for that. You'll just have to try it and see how it works for you. So knowing a little bit, something about the market helps a lot. Because if you don't know that market, how do you do a good market analysis? Same question is true for appraisers. You have an appraiser who appraises 80% of his transactions in Will County, and now all of a sudden he comes up and he's appraising something in Batavia. He may never have appraised here before. He's not going to know the market. His appraiser just isn't going to be as accurate as somebody who appraises 80% of their deals in the Batavia, Geneva area. So that CMA is an important part of it. In order to do a good CMA, you've got to know the property too. So you may go to see the property. You may actually go and see the property before you go back for a listing appointment, so that you get an idea. I can take stats out of the MLS, but if I've never seen the inside of the house, I don't know how many dogs are living there tearing up the carpet, or how smelly it is, or how awesome it is. I can't really do a real good market analysis. Part of what you're going to need to be able to do as part of this listing process is not only be able to calculate what you think the sales price is going to be, which comes from your CMA data, what the commissions are going to be, because it isn't just your money, it's the seller's money first. They're going to want to know how much are they paying you. And also, how much money is going to be left to them. This idea of net to seller. Out of the sales amount, how much of it is coming to us? Sellers want to know something like, you know, we need $100,000 out of this sale to be able to have enough money to go buy our next place. So they'll say, well, if I'm paying you 5% and we need 100 grand, what does the place have to sell for? And you gotta be able to answer that. And that's upside down, because if you just add 5% to 100 grand, you're wrong. Doesn't work like that. So, back to our scenario of the other night.
Hey, Cliff, before
Yeah.
you leave it.
Yeah.
In your experience, is there any validity to Zillow.com and similar websites?
So we got Zillow and Trulia and Homes.com, and if you go compare all three of them on any given property tonight, they'll be widely different. So in general, I'm leery. They don't know how to think. They don't, you know, it all comes down to the programming, which is done by people who probably really aren't appraisers or, you know, even real estate agents. And so I think it varies. If I'm a buyer's agent and I can use those tools along with the assessed valuation, I will do that to try and say, hey, look, it's, you know, here's what it's at for taxes, here's what it's at for that. But if I'm on the listing side, I'm gonna wanna stay away from that stuff unless it shows a higher value than it should. So in a market that's climbing, where you can tell that it's getting better, the asking prices should be constantly be higher, and so the data you're using is trailing. That takes that kind of interpolation to say, well, last October, a house identical to this sold for 300. So this year, let's shoot for 310. It's just, you know, professional judgment. Those systems won't show that at all. And, you know, I'm just a little leery of technology solves everything kind of mentality. So I think I would study them and get a better sense of what you think and make your own determination. But I think being leery of them is the place to start. I don't think they're as good as their owners, founders think they are, but they're probably getting better.
Well, where can you find the information on what the recent property sold at?
Two places. One's in the multiple listing service, and the reason that Zillow and Trulia have information come from two sources, the bulk of which is the MLS, if they have an agreement with the MLS. The other is from the listing or buyer's agents who have accounts with them, and they put that information in themselves. The other source is public record. So if you go to the township assessor's office, for example, or the county tax records office, that lags. Sometimes they'll have it within 6 weeks, sometimes you won't get it for 6 to 9 months, depending on how backed up they are in the paperwork process. The easiest place to go for the data is the MLS, for residential stuff.
Okay, would you call that Truly?
Trulia. Trulia. Zillow just bought Trulia recently. That's how it went, right? Zillow bought Trulia. So Zillow and Trulia were the top two sites, and it's Trulia.com and it's Zillow.com, and I'm not sure that those two are even within 10% sometimes, and now they have the same owner, you know, the same property. I haven't done enough of that, Jeff, to really know, but a good practice for anybody in the room who owns their own place, go home and plug your own house in, you know, tonight or tomorrow or whatever.
That's what prompted the question.
And then start tracking
I
them.
figured
Yeah.
the seller's gonna do that first thing.
Sure, and so you should know that. But if you don't think it's good, you should go to the listing appointment, argue, you know, prepared with a good argument as to why you don't think it's accurate data. And if you're gonna use that, or if it works in your favor to use it, then just know what you have, you know, basically. I think in time those data services will get better, but I'm not that excited about it. But for anybody in the room, again, I encourage you, start tracking that process now. Find your own house and maybe something else you know, and start to get a sense of what you think. And then once you get into business, go back and do your own market analysis, you know, just for your own self. Take a half an hour, and see what you think. Okay, so there's another way to calculate this that, you know, besides the way we did it. Sales price times the commission rate, you know, well, actually I'm not done yet. So we're gonna get the sales price, and then we would take that out and we would get the 95,000, right? So that's the way we did this the other night. There's another way to do this besides this. Math is magic, so there's lots of different ways to do the same thing. So if we look at it from the standpoint that the seller gets all of the proceeds, 100%, that's everything, right? So if the seller gets everything, net of whatever the costs are, like commission, et cetera, and we're only talking about commission now, we're gonna ignore any other closing costs. Then another way to calculate what the seller is looking for is this way. Take the sales price of 100%, whatever the number is, subtract out the commission at whatever the rate is. In this case, we're still using the same 5%. And what the seller is really going to get out of the transaction is 95% of whatever the sale price is. So this is the way to say net to seller, what the seller is going to net, what they're going to take home. So this is the 100 grand, this is the 5 grand, subtract it out, it's 95 grand. So I've taken a step out of here, really, effectively, if you learn to do the top part kind of automatically, then you can just do the bottom part. So when somebody says to me, you know, if my place sells for 100 and, you know, you're gonna take 5%, and what am I gonna be left with? I think like this. This is the math that I do in my head to calculate a commission. I don't do what's on the previous slide. I don't do the 100 grand times the 5%, that equals 5,000, minus 5,000 to 100, it's 95. I do what's on the bottom. Just a different way to do the same thing. And the reason I do what's on the bottom is because this is reversible. I can do this backwards, literally. Remember in middle school math when you used to have to check everything and you used to go, God, this is awful. Well, some of you anyway. So how would you check this problem? How would you reverse it? 95,000 divided by 95% is going to give you 100,000. You took 95,000 divided by 0.9, it's going to give you 100. It's easily reversible. So if somebody says to me, I got to get 95,000 out of the sale of my house, and you're taking a 5% commission, what do we have to sell it for me to get my 95 grand to cover my cash down payment and other closing costs? I can reverse that and say, well, take the 95,000 divided by the 95% you're going to get. Oh, we got to sell it for 100 grand. But notice that 5% of 95,000 is not 5,000. 5% of that's going to be like 47.50. You cannot just add the percentage of the commission to the net amount and get the sale price. It doesn't work like that. So here's what we end up with. 100,000 times 95% is 95 grand, and that gives us a formula that you can memorize if you want, or you can write this down. If you take the net dollars to the seller, whatever that is in your math problem, and divide that by the net percentage that goes to the seller, that's going to give you the minimum required sales price. So if the test question is, seller needs to net $95,000 on the sale, and you're charging a 5% commission, what does the house need to sell for the seller to meet their goals? The answer is the net dollars to the seller, in this case 95 grand, divided by the net percentage to the seller. Well, they're not getting 100% because I'm keeping 5, so they're only getting 95%. So I take the 95,000 divided by the 95%, and that's going to be the answer, which is the 100 grand. What's the opposite of multiplication? It's division, right? So this formula is the way to check or reverse this problem. Just do it uphill. That's, I'm told, a fairly common math question at the state exam. So you should expect to see a question like this on your final. I'm not guaranteeing there's one, but you should be prepared for it. Okay, so again, looking at the formula, net dollars to the seller divided by net percentage to the seller is the minimum required sales price. So there's the example. 95,000 divided by 95% is 100 grand. Now before we take our break here for the night, remember that everything we're doing in this course, everything we're doing for the state exam is based on what kind of questions? Multiple choice. 4 possible answer, multiple choice. So if you can't do this, if this turns your brain inside out, it's okay. You can do it the way we looked at it the other night and get the correct answer on the test. How is that possible? What's always right in front of you on a multiple choice test? The correct answer. You have 4 possible options, A, B, C, or D. If you want to do the 100,000 times 5% minus the 5,000 I get, okay, 95,000. You just have to run that 4 times with answers A, B, C, and D. Hopefully only one of them works. Circle that one, okay? That's so just, keep in mind that I like to think this way. This makes perfectly good sense to me, but I've just asked you to think upside down or backwards for those of you who aren't accustomed to thinking in this language. Again, I prefer this method because it's much faster and simpler for me. But for you, if it doesn't work that way, don't put pressure on yourself. You don't have to learn it this way. Just remember that it's going to take you possibly 4 times as long to do a multiple choice test question if you have to do it longhand and then try it on each 4 to figure out which one of those is the only one that works. Everybody follow that? Okay. I'll give you a couple of, in this take-home unit, printed unit test where you're gonna self-evaluate that I'm giving you tonight, or practice test, or whatever you wanna call it. There'll be a couple of practice questions in here. So you'll have a couple of practices there. There's at least one in the book. There's some in the course module, and we'll go over this again in the week leading up to the final exam, so that you've seen this, before the final, so that you're prepared to do it. And people don't get knocked out for one question. So, and don't get too freaked out about it. Any questions about this process? Yes, Eric?
Yeah, timing restrictions for the test both here and at the state?
Here, there's no time limit. On the night of the final, I will typically be here early, so people can get started early. If you can get here at 6, for example, the night of the final, you could have as much as 4 hours to take it. It's not intended to be a time limit. Anybody in the room who feels they need more time than that should come talk to me, because I will allow you to have it. At the state exam, the time limit effectively, if you have the entire exam, is 3.5 hours. And we'll revisit that again and how that lays out when we go over chapter 14. Okay, let's take a break. Let's come back at 5 after, since we just did some math. I'll give you a